Queen Camilla had prepared herself for a difficult conversation, but not for the words King Charles was about to deliver. With one sealed order resting between them, the monarch confirmed that her unrestricted access to Windsor Castle was over. Her personal keys would be surrendered. Her private entry privileges would be withdrawn. From that moment forward, even the Queen would need formal clearance to enter the most protected areas of the royal residence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles waited until the evening staff were gone before summoning Camilla to a private sitting room inside Windsor Castle. No aides stood nearby. No private secretary remained outside. Windsor Castle, one of the sovereign's principal homes, carried constitutional weight, so inner access was never casual. The silence told her this meeting had moved beyond marriage. Camilla sat across from him and watched his hand rest beside the sealed order. Charles did not delay. He told her that her unrestricted access was being revoked. She could still attend approved engagements and official ceremonies, but the private apartments, restricted corridors, family archives, and secured chapel rooms would require written authorization. Royal household authorization means formal permission issued through the king's staff, meaning even she would be treated as a controlled visitor. Camilla did not move. She did not speak. When Charles explained that every personal key had to be surrendered before midnight, her fingers reached toward the order and stopped. The queen consort looked at him as though she expected the sentence to change. It did not. "Is this temporary?" Camilla finally asked. "No," Charles answered. The king kept his voice low, and that calmness cut deeper than anger. He offered no promise of review, no private exception, or any phrase to protect her pride. The decision had already entered the security system. Replacement instructions had been issued, her access codes would expire at midnight, and the household had been warned against exceptions. Camilla felt the shock turn colder when Charles revealed that this was not punishment for one misunderstanding. Private rooms had been entered. Unauthorized visitors had been allowed too close. A confidential area had been crossed after a clear warning. Charles rose, left the order between them, and walked toward the door. Camilla remained seated, because the decree was only the beginning. Behind it was the incident that had convinced her husband she could no longer be trusted inside Windsor. But before Camilla could challenge the order, she had to confront the far more painful truth that this decision had been made by the one person whose confidence she believed she would never lose. For the public, Windsor Castle represented continuity, ceremony, and royal permanence. For Charles and Camilla, it carried something more private: years of shared history, fragile loyalty, and promises made after decades of scrutiny. Now the same walls had become a boundary between them. The king was defending the crown, while his wife was fighting to preserve her place beside him, and neither could pretend that the decision was purely about security. Camilla remained alone after Charles left, listening to the silence he had created. Windsor was not simply a royal residence. It was one of the monarchy's most important homes, a place tied to the sovereign's duty, family history, and national continuity. For the king, those rooms carried the memory of his mother and the burden of protecting everything she had left behind. Trust inside those walls was not personal. It was absolute. Camilla understood Windsor differently. For years, she had lived under judgment, watched by a public that once refused to accept her. Moving freely through the castle had become proof that she was no longer standing at the edge of royal life. She had earned a place near the center. Now that place felt uncertain again. The queen consort slowly reached into her handbag and removed a small Windsor key. She placed it on the table beside the order. The sound was faint, but the meaning was brutal. This was not just metal being returned. It was acceptance being taken back. Charles stood in another room with the security order open before him. The final paragraph carried his signature, yet his hand remained pressed against the page. He could still tear it apart. He could still protect his wife from embarrassment. But the king knew that shielding Camilla emotionally could leave the monarchy exposed. A husband might forgive. A sovereign could not ignore risk. Camilla's sadness sharpened when a private aide confirmed that William had been briefed before she entered the room. The prince had not demanded the restriction, nor had he openly approved it. But the future king's early involvement changed everything. Succession planning meant preparing the monarchy for the next reign, and his presence suggested that this was larger than a dispute between husband and wife. Camilla then noticed another name in the revised protocol. Catherine would keep access to several family rooms now closed to her. The Princess of Wales remained trusted where the Queen Consort had been restricted. That detail cut deepest. Camilla began to understand that authority inside Windsor was being quietly rearranged. Charles was not only closing doors, he was deciding who would stand closest to the crown during the most fragile stage of his reign. And the deeper she searched for an explanation, the more every path led back to one specific evening, the moment Windsor's private boundaries were crossed, and the king's patience finally broke. The final decision did not begin with a legal briefing or a palace security review. It began 3 weeks earlier, after a private memorial service inside St. George's Chapel. As the royal family departed, Camilla remained behind and entered a restricted corridor, leading toward rooms that had been sealed since the late Queen's death. What happened next lasted less than 20 minutes, but by the time Charles learned the truth, the damage to his trust was irreversible. Charles had attended the service beside Camilla, William, Catherine, and Princess Anne. The gathering marked a private family anniversary and had been kept away from cameras, with only a few clergy members and trusted staff present. St. George's Chapel is the royal church inside Windsor, used for important family ceremonies and burials, which made the occasion deeply personal for everyone there. Camilla stayed behind after the others began to leave. Security officers had already been told to keep the East Passage closed because the rooms beyond it still contained personal effects, letters, and devotional items belonging to Queen Elizabeth II. Those rooms had not yet been formally catalogued, meaning their contents had not been fully recorded or approved for access. Camilla told a junior equerry that Charles had asked her to retrieve something. An equerry is a royal aide who assists with official and private duties. Using her unrestricted access, she passed through the locked corridor and entered the late Queen's prayer room without the king's knowledge. Anne returned moments later to collect a remembrance card, left after the service. The Princess Royal saw the restricted door open and found Camilla standing near a marked cabinet, holding a small velvet case. "Who gave you permission?" Anne asked. Camilla did not lower the case. She answered that she did not need permission to move through her own residence. The princess stepped forward, closed the cabinet herself, and replied that Windsor belonged to the crown before it belonged to any one person. The silence between them carried more force than shouting ever could. Charles learned what happened through a documented security report delivered that evening. The electronic log showed no request from him, no retrieval order, and no authorized reason for Camilla to enter. It also recorded that one of her private assistants had asked about the room's contents 2 days earlier. The king read the report twice. He removed his glasses, set them beside the file, and said nothing for several minutes. Then he called his private secretary and instructed him to prepare permanent access restrictions. Charles chose procedure over confrontation. Camilla knew nothing yet. Yet when she finally realized which incident had condemned her, disbelief hardened into anger, and she demanded the confrontation Charles had deliberately postponed. Camilla did not wait for another formal summons. The following morning, she crossed the private gallery before her access codes could expire, and entered Charles's study without an appointment. The king was standing beside his desk when she placed the Windsor key directly in front of him. What followed was not a discussion between a monarch and his consort. It was a confrontation between a husband who felt betrayed and a wife who believed she had been publicly humiliated. Camilla reached the study just before the new security rules took full effect. a protection officer paused at the door, unsure whether her old clearance still applied. Royal protection officers are trained staff responsible for the safety and controlled movement of senior family members. Charles saw the hesitation and allowed her inside, knowing another delay would only make the damage worse. The key struck the desk with a small, hard sound. Camilla stared at Charles, waiting for him to pick it up. He did not. That key had once meant trust, acceptance, and freedom inside Windsor. Now it had become proof that years of belonging could be reduced to one withdrawn privilege. Camilla's anger broke first. She accused Charles of warning William, Anne, Catherine, and senior courtiers before speaking to his own wife. Courtiers are trusted members of the royal household who help manage official and private duties. She told him he had protected himself from criticism by sacrificing her dignity. Charles did not step back. The king said she had entered a sealed room, used his name without permission, and involved a member of her staff in the deception. Camilla replied that he had chosen the crown over her. "You forced me to make that choice," Charles said. Camilla then turned her anger toward Princess Anne. She claimed Anne had waited for years to weaken her position and had used the chapel incident to strike. Charles rejected the accusation immediately. The monarch explained that the electronic security record, not his sister's word, had made the decision unavoidable. Anne had only discovered what the system later proved. Charles then revealed the truth Camilla had not expected. The chapel breach was not the first warning. Weeks earlier, a guest connected to her private circle had been taken through an unapproved entrance during a family weekend. The matter had been quietly contained, but the second incident ended any chance of forgiveness. Camilla fell silent. Charles finally lifted the surrendered key, placed it inside a wooden drawer, and closed it. The argument was over. Yet the decision had not been shaped by him alone, because while the king had delivered the judgment, the machinery behind it had been assembled by another royal figure, one whose influence over Windsor was growing rapidly. The decision carried Charles' signature, but its architecture bore William's caution. As heir to the throne, the prince had spent months reviewing how royal residences would function during periods of illness, transition, or national emergency. Windsor sat at the heart of those plans. When he saw evidence that private access rules had been treated as optional, he did not demand punishment. He did something more powerful. He presented the king with consequences Charles could no longer dismiss. William had taken on a wider role in security planning, household coordination, and continuity arrangements. Continuity planning means preparing the monarchy to keep functioning if the sovereign becomes ill, unavailable, or unable to direct events. Windsor mattered because it could serve as a family home, a ceremonial center, and a protected command location at the same time. The prince saw a danger larger than Camilla. Personal access had begun to overlap with constitutional responsibility, and that made every exception risky. William believed entry to protected areas should depend on official duty, not marriage, affection, or private influence. One weak rule could become a future crisis. William paused outside Charles's office before the meeting. He rehearsed the words quietly, knowing they could wound his father. The future king respected the marriage, but silence would mean protecting family peace at the expense of the crown. Charles listened, then closed the security file. The king said restricting Camilla would look cruel and personal. She had spent years earning public acceptance, and the decision could make her appear rejected by her own husband. William did not soften his answer. He told Charles that 2 breaches had already occurred. If the rules changed whenever the Queen felt entitled to an exception, every future security instruction would become meaningless. The prince then opened a confidential continuity file. It described what would happen if Charles became temporarily unable to direct the household. Under the current system, Camilla's private authority inside Windsor could clash with instructions issued by the heir. The king read the scenario twice. William also explained why Catherine would retain access. The Princess of Wales held a defined place in continuity planning as the wife of the heir and mother of the next generation. Her clearance was attached to an approved role, not personal favor. Charles finally understood the danger. The order was no longer about punishment. It was about preventing two centers of authority from forming inside Windsor. Camilla learned the truth through a private briefing from one of her senior aides. William had presented the argument that changed Charles's mind. Her hurt immediately sharpened into suspicion. That suspicion spread quickly through Camilla's household, and within hours, the first visible consequences of the king's order began stripping away the life she had taken for granted. At midnight, the order became reality. There was no announcement, no ceremonial handover, and no public explanation. A green light on Camilla's private Windsor pass simply turned red. Staff members received revised instructions. Locks were recoded. Rooms she had entered freely the previous week were suddenly beyond her reach. The most devastating consequence was not that the Queen had lost access. It was that dozens of people were now required to witness that loss. Protection officers updated the entry lists before dawn. They removed Camilla from automatic overnight clearance and placed every official visit under the King's household. Automatic clearance means permission granted without a fresh check each time. From now on, she would need approval before entering areas that had once opened to her without question. Camilla's staff felt the change almost as quickly as she did. Two members of the Queen Consort's private office lost independent entry rights. Clothing, personal belongings, and official materials could only be collected under supervision. The restriction had moved beyond one woman. It had begun cutting through her entire household. Camilla arrived later for a scheduled luncheon and instinctively presented her old pass at the private entrance. The reader flashed red. A young officer looked down, then back at her. He asked the Queen to wait while authorization was confirmed. She said nothing. The officer apologized, but the apology only deepened the humiliation because both of them understood that he was following Charles's direct order. Camilla entered several minutes later with her head held high. She walked past the staff without complaint and reached a small dressing room before her composure finally broke. The Queen Consort removed her gloves, sat alone, and whispered that she had become a guest in her husband's home. The damage widened again when an aide informed her that her private Windsor suite was under review. Rooms once reserved for her would remain locked whenever she was absent. Several personal items would be transferred to Clarence House, her London residence, suggesting that even overnight stays could soon require special approval. Camilla made one final request. In a handwritten note, she asked Charles to let her keep access to a private garden entrance. The king read the message, folded it once, and told his secretary that one exception would destroy the purpose of every other restriction. Camilla prepared to leave in silence. Then Princess Anne entered the corridor alone. She did not pass by. She stopped and asked for 5 minutes, without aides, officers, or family intermediaries. For the first time since the crisis began, Camilla would face someone who neither feared her title nor needed Charles's permission to speak with brutal honesty. There were no advisors in the room, no security files on the table, and no king standing between them. Princess Anne closed the door and faced Camilla alone. For years, the two women had maintained a disciplined royal peace, formal smiles, measured conversations, and carefully protected boundaries. Now every layer of protocol had been removed. Anne had not come to celebrate the Queen's humiliation. She had come to explain why Charles's decision had become unavoidable. Anne chose a modest morning room instead of a formal office. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the sovereign's eldest daughter, wanted no witnesses and no palace record. She told Camilla that the conversation would not be repeated by her, no matter how painful it became. Camilla remained guarded. She asked whether Anne had wanted her removed from Windsor from the beginning. The Queen Consort expected denial, but the answer was sharper. Anne said she wanted the late Queen's private rooms protected, and she would have challenged William, Charles, or anyone else who crossed that boundary without permission. Anne then admitted something Camilla had never expected to hear. She had not found it easy to accept her place in the family. Yet the princess also recognized the years of service, public hostility, and humiliation she had endured beside Charles. Camilla had fought to become accepted, and Windsor had become the symbol of that victory. "That is why losing the key hurts so much," Anne said. Camilla looked away. Anne told her the restriction felt like exile because unrestricted access had become proof that she belonged. But fighting the order would create a worse impression. It would suggest that status mattered more to her than trust, and that personal pride mattered more than the crown's safety. Anne then revealed the detail Charles had kept private. During a recorded conversation with his private secretary, the king had delayed signing the decree for 2 days. He repeatedly asked whether a warning would be enough. Only the second unauthorized entry record convinced him that loyalty could no longer erase risk. Camilla's anger finally weakened. After a long silence, she admitted that she had used Charles's name because she believed her position entitled her to know what was inside the sealed room. For the first time, she stopped blaming William, Anne, and palace officials. The princess did not offer false comfort. Windsor access might never return, she said, but dignity still could. Camilla made her choice. She would not challenge the decree publicly. Instead, she asked for a private meeting with Charles, not to reverse the judgment, but to admit why he had made it. That quiet admission changed the crisis. But before Charles and Camilla could repair what remained between them, the hidden order escaped the palace and became a national sensation. By sunrise, a private restriction had become the defining royal story of the day. The nation did not see the security files, the sealed corridor, or the painful conversations behind closed doors. It saw one unforgettable detail. The Queen's Windsor pass had flashed red. That single image transformed a complicated constitutional decision into a public symbol of rejection. Supporters called it accountability. Critics called it humiliation. Inside the palace, Charles knew silence could no longer contain the consequences. The story spread across television, radio, digital outlets, and every major morning newspaper. Palace communications refused to discuss private security arrangements, meaning the rules controlling access to protected royal spaces. That silence was meant to defend Windsor, but it only made the public more curious. Charles watched the coverage alone in his breakfast room. A broadcaster called the restriction the most personal boundary of his reign. The king lowered the volume, yet he did not turn off the screen. He had defended the crown, but now millions were judging what that defense had cost his wife. Public opinion divided almost instantly. Some praised Charles for proving that no one, not even Camilla, stood above royal security. Others argued that the queen consort had been publicly diminished, and that the monarchy's image of unity had cracked under pressure. Camilla refused to disappear. Her advisors urged her to cancel an afternoon engagement, warning that every movement and expression would be examined. She rejected the advice. The queen told them that hiding would make her look ashamed of a decision she had chosen to accept. Outside Windsor Castle, a crowd gathered near the Henry gate. Newspaper sellers held up a front page showing the castle entrance beneath 4 brutal words: "The Queen locked out." One woman in the crowd quietly said that the crown had finally placed duty above marriage. Camilla arrived at her engagement, knowing the question would come. A reporter asked whether she still felt welcome at Windsor. "The king has acted to protect the crown, and I respect his decision," she answered. The sentence changed everything. Camilla did not attack Charles, blame William, or question Anne. She ended the appearance of open warfare with one calm statement. The queen consort had lost unrestricted access, but she refused to lose control of the story. Charles watched the recorded clip twice. The monarch heard no bitterness in her voice and saw no attempt to weaken his judgment. For the first time since the crisis began, He believed trust might not be completely destroyed. That evening, Charles requested one final private meeting, not to return the surrendered key, but to decide whether trust could survive after privilege had been taken away. The Windsor key was still locked inside Charles's desk when Camilla returned for their final conversation. She knew it would not be offered back, and the king knew she had not come to demand it. The crisis had moved beyond doors, passes, and private rooms. It had become a test of whether their marriage could survive a boundary imposed by the crown. This time, neither entered the room prepared to accuse the other. Charles waited in the same private room where the order had first been delivered. Camilla took the same chair, but the sealed decree was gone. A decree is a formal decision issued by royal authority, and its absence made the room feel less official, though no less final. Only the surrendered key remained between them. Camilla spoke first. She admitted that entering the late Queen's private room under false authorization had been wrong. The Queen consort did not blame Anne, William, palace officials, or the pressure surrounding her position. She told Charles that she had confused closeness to the sovereign with a right to cross boundaries that existed for a reason. Charles listened without interrupting. Then the king confirmed that the decision would remain permanent. Camilla could still enter Windsor for official duties, family occasions, and approved stays, but the restricted apartments, archives, and sealed rooms would remain outside her independent authority. The truth still hurt. Charles admitted that he had allowed others to prepare the restriction before speaking to Camilla. The monarch understood why that had felt like an ambush, and why the public consequences had deepened her humiliation. He apologized for the pain he caused, but he did not apologize for protecting Windsor. Camilla accepted the difference. Charles reached across the table and took her hand. He left the key untouched. That single choice defined what remained between them. She was still his wife. She remained queen consort, the title held by the wife of a reigning king. But marriage would no longer create automatic power over every protected space belonging to the crown. Camilla stood when the conversation ended. She looked once at the small brass key, then turned toward the door. Charles opened it for her himself. She did not look back, and he did not call her back. Both understood that the judgment was settled. Camilla had lost unrestricted Windsor access, but she had not lost her marriage, title, or years of service. Charles had proved that duty could reach even those closest to him. She had recovered her dignity by accepting responsibility instead of demanding privilege. The key remained inside the king's desk, but the monarchy emerged with its boundary restored, its authority clarified, and its hardest lesson understood. Love may stand beside the crown, but it can never be permitted to rule in its place. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.